for $100 million. Let that number sit for a moment. In the late 1950s, that wasn't just a massive corporate loss, it was an astronomical fortune. Adjusted for inflation today, we are talking about more than $4 billion, all poured into a single, agonizing bet. It remains one of the most staggering product failures in human history. A disaster so total, so culturally devastating, that its very name became an immediate synonym for failure. This isn't just a story about a bad car. It's a tragedy of corporate blind spots, incredible hubris, and a warning that still haunts the boardrooms of Detroit, Stuttgart, and Silicon Valley to this day. This is the story of the Ford Edsel. To truly understand the Edsel, we have to look past the punchlines and see the world through the eyes of Ford's executives in 1955. Post-World War II America was booming. The economy was roaring, wages were rising, and a massive new middle class was emerging. People didn't just want a car to get from point A to point B anymore. They wanted a car that broadcasted their newfound success to the neighborhood. And in this golden age of the automobile, General Motors was the undisputed king. GM had mastered a brilliant psychological strategy known as the ladder of success. A young worker bought a cheap Chevrolet. As they got a promotion, they traded it in for a Pontiac, then an Oldsmobile, then a Buick, and finally, the ultimate symbol of American achievement, a Cadillac. Ford, on the other hand, had a broken ladder. They had the mass-market Ford brand at the bottom and the premium Lincoln and Mercury brands at the top. But there was a massive, gaping hole right in the middle. Every year, hundreds of thousands of loyal Ford owners grew a little wealthier, looked at Ford's lineup, and realized the company had nothing to offer their new tax bracket. So, they crossed the street and bought an Oldsmobile or a Buick. Ford was essentially acting as a feeder program for General Motors. The vision for the Edsel, originally codenamed the E-Car for experimental, was beautiful in its simplicity. Ford would build a completely new division to fill that gap. It would be a technological marvel, packed with features the world had never seen, wrapped in a design that would make every other car on the road look instantly obsolete. It was a noble, necessary ambition. Ford wasn't trying to build a gimmick. They were trying to build the future. But great ambition, when decoupled from reality, breeds a very specific kind of corporate blindness. Ford didn't just want to launch a car, they wanted to launch a masterpiece. And to do it, they turned to the cutting edge of 1955 technology, market research, and data. They spent years polling the American public, asking thousands of people what they wanted in a car. But they didn't just ask about horsepower or trunk space. They asked deep, psychological questions. Is a dynamic person more likely to drive an Oldsmobile or a Buick? What does a car say about a man's character? The data poured in, and Ford's newly formed WizKids, a group of brilliant, hyper-analytical executives brought in to modernize the company, believed they had unlocked the secret formula. They concluded that the American public wanted a car that was smart, distinctive, and authoritative. Armed with this data, Ford's designers, led by Roy Brown, set out to create something entirely unique. At the time, every American car featured a horizontal front grille. Brown decided the E-Car would be different. It would feature a bold, vertical grille inspired by classic European luxury cars like Jaguar and Alfa Romeo. But as the months rolled on, the project began to suffer from a fatal lack of centralized leadership. The design was tweaked by committees. Engineering demands forced changes to the proportions. What started as a sleek, aerodynamic concept slowly morphed into something far heavier and more complex. And then came the naming disaster. Ford's marketing team compiled a list of over 18,000 potential names. They even hired the legendary poet Marianne Moore to come up with ideas, who famously suggested names like the Resilient Bullet and Utopian Turtletop. Ultimately, the board rejected every single one of the 18,000 names. In a moment of pure emotional sentimentality, the board decided to name the brand after Henry Ford's late, beloved son, Edsel. It was a beautiful tribute inside the company walls. But to the public, the word Edsel was clunky, unfamiliar, and meant absolutely nothing. Worse still, Ford's marketing machine began to overpromise on a scale never seen before. They launched a massive teaser campaign, hiding the car behind curtains and under tarps, promising a revolutionary automotive experience that would change American life forever. They built a towering wall of hype that no physical object made of steel and rubber could ever possibly live up to. September 4th, 1957. E-Day. After years of secrecy and $400 million spent, Ford officially unveiled the Edsel across 1,200 dealerships nationwide. Nearly 3 million Americans flooded into showrooms to finally see the mystery car. They walked in expecting a spaceship. What they saw left them utterly bewildered. The bold, vertical European grille that Roy Brown had envisioned didn't look luxurious to the public. It looked bizarre. Comedians instantly began making jokes on late-night television, comparing the grille to an Oldsmobile sucking a lemon, or worse, a toilet seat. But the styling was only the tip of the iceberg. The Edsel was packed with advanced technology that simply wasn't ready for prime time. Its most famous feature was the Teletouch transmission, a system that placed the gear-shifting buttons directly in the center hub of the steering wheel. It was incredibly complex, driven by electric motors located underneath the car. Because Ford had rushed the Edsel to market, the quality control was a nightmare. The Teletouch buttons would regularly jam. Mechanics frequently found that the gears shifted into reverse when the driver was just trying to honk the horn. Even worse, Ford didn't build dedicated factories for the Edsel. They forced existing Ford and Mercury assembly lines to build Edsels between their normal runs. Workers hated this. They had to stop their familiar routines, grab different tools, and look at completely different blueprints for just one car before switching back. As a result, many Edsels left the factory unfinished. Dealerships received cars with missing parts, unbolted seats, and trunks that leaked like sieves in the rain. Ford needed to sell 200,000 units in the first year just to break even. They sold barely over 63,000. By the second year, sales plummeted to 44,000. By November of 1959, just over 2 years after its grand debut, Ford quietly pulled the plug on the entire Edsel brand. The easy narrative is to say the Edsel failed because it was an ugly, broken machine. But that is where the simple history misses the profound tragedy of the Edsel. Because by the time Ford killed the brand, they had actually fixed it. Look at the 1960 Edsel Ranger. The infamous vertical grille was gone, replaced by a gorgeous, wide, horizontal design. The unreliable Teletouch system had been scrapped for a rock-solid, conventional transmission. The assembly lines had worked out the kinks, and the build quality was exceptional. The 1960 Edsel was, by all objective accounts, a truly great American car. But it didn't matter. The public's mind was made up. The brand was poisoned. And the deepest irony of all, someone inside Ford knew this was going to happen before the first car was ever built. His name was Robert McNamara, one of the brilliant whiz kids who would later become the president of Ford and eventually the U.S. Secretary of Defense. McNamara was a pure numbers guy. He looked at the market data in 1957 and warned the board that the post-war economic boom was ending. He pointed out that the United States was entering a sharp economic recession in late 1957. McNamara warned that people were suddenly turning away from giant, chrome-heavy gas guzzlers and looking for smaller, economical compact cars. He begged them to halt the launch. But the corporate momentum was too powerful. The $400 million train had already left the station, and no one had the courage to pull the emergency brake. The real cause of the Edsel's death wasn't bad styling or faulty buttons. It was timing. Ford spent $500 million building a car for the mid-1950s, only to deliver it to a completely changed world in 1958. The Edsel disaster nearly broke Ford, but it also forced a brutal, healthy reckoning. It taught the entire automotive industry a lesson it would never forget. Data is a mirror of the past, not a crystal ball for the future. You cannot design a product entirely by committee, and you can never let your marketing outpace your engineering. McNamara took the lessons of the Edsel and immediately greenlit the Ford Falcon, a simple, compact, no-frills car that became an absolute sales triumph, saving the company's balance sheet. A few years later, using the lessons of individual design leadership rather than committee consensus, Ford would release the Mustang, cementing their place in history. Today, surviving Edsels are no longer mocked. They are highly prized collector's items, celebrated for their boldness, their unique style, and their rarity. They stand as a beautiful, tragic monument to a moment when an American giant dared to dream incredibly big, but forgot to look at the road right in front of them. Which leaves us with one final, fascinating thought. Corporate hubris, committee design, and overpromising marketing didn't die in 1960. Could this happen again today? And to which brand? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from the vaults of automotive history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.